You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Well, welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, all of you book lovers, literally all around the world. What do we have, Kristen? 76 countries, all 50 states, and 1,600 cities, loyal listeners. And we know why you're here. It's because of great authors like the one we have here with us today. We're super excited that we've got Nick Petrie with us. You know him, you love him because of the Peter Ash series, and the latest book, The Price You Pay, is phenomenal. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's quite a privilege to be here. So I'm looking forward to this.
We're going to dive down deep into this great novel. But before we do, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you, maybe a couple things they might not already know. Nick received an MFA in fiction from the University of Washington. He won the Hopwood Award for short fiction while he was still an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. His story, and I love the title, At the Laundromat, won short story contest in the Seattle Review. That sounds interesting. He has also won the ITW Thriller Award, Barry Awards, the Literary Award from the Wisconsin Library Association. He was one of Apple's 10 writers to read. He was named Best Thriller by Apple Books. And our good friend, David Baldacci, who has been on BOOKSTORM podcasts, and of course, we love his writing, he says Peter Ash is one of the most complex characters I've come across in a long time. And yes, David, I think that's why we all love him so much. He's deep, like all of us in the real world. One more thing I've got to add here about Nick. He works as a carpenter, a remodeling contractor at one time, a building inspector. Wow, that comes in handy, and I bet your wife is happy.
She used to be happier back when I had time to work on our house.
He lives in Milwaukee, and where he's hard at work on his next Peter Ash novel. This makes the rest of us very happy. Welcome to BOOKSTORM.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's, as I said, it's a pleasure and a privilege. I love talking about books with pretty much anybody. So it's great to be here.
Well, you've given us a lot to talk about. So we're here to talk about your newest installment in the series, The Price You Pay. And as Chris mentioned, we loved it. This was a nonstop thrill ride. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers, I promise, but I thought I'd give our listeners just a little bit of the background of what's going on in the story. And if you want to add anything at the end, please be our guest. Now, in this story, I'm going to work hard to not give away spoilers because I'm going to tell you that's kind of tricky here. Peter Ash and his closest friend Lewis have a long history together. They have both tried to leave some things in their past, including their work as the ghost killers, and live lives in the present with the people that they care about. But now Lewis needs a favor, and we know that Peter's going to be there for him. One of Lewis's former criminal associates may be in trouble. So they band together. They drive through an incredible snowstorm. That was an amazing scene, actually. And they find Teddy in a very dire situation. And they learn that someone has stolen all of Teddy's notebooks that were full of incriminating secrets about Lewis's long ago crimes. Now, those notebooks in the wrong hands could endanger everything that they all care about, including Lewis's wife, Dinah, and their two boys. Now, the search ropes them all in. And even Peter's girlfriend and Dinah have a lot to contribute here. They face some ruthless and violent foes. And there's a particularly violent one that is very much bent on revenge. Would you like to add anything to that summary, Nick?
I think that's a great summary. I mean, for me, one of the sort of the assignment I gave myself for this book, and for every book I sort of give myself an assignment, was to sort of turn the tables, because usually it's Peter who's off trying to help somebody, and when things get too dangerous for him to do alone, he calls on Lewis. And in this one, really, Lewis is sort of the client character here, and so we get to see much more of what Lewis's former life was like, and we get a much deeper dive into his relationship with his wife and his adoptive kids. So that, to me, that is the thing that sets this book apart in particular, is that I really wanted to show more about kind of who Lewis is, to highlight Lewis.
I loved it because you really ramped up the stakes for everyone. There's a lot of current relationships that obviously need to be protected, but we feel that throughout this entire story. It undergirds everything.
Well, that's the thing about, I mean, I'm really interested in character. For me, I don't begin a book with the plot. I begin a book by thinking about who these characters are and what they care about and what they're afraid of. And I think when you begin with character, and you can, the readers really care about those characters in the way that they might not in something that is, it might be sort of an adrenaline-filled book, but it's really about story, about what happens next. And that's my goal too. But I think when you start with character and you can get the readers to really care about the characters, that adds so much more to the book, because it does raise the stakes. What's the there's a, I'm gonna get this wrong, but there's a sort of an old saw for writers that, like, if there's a bomb ticking under a chair, and the reader knows about it, but the character doesn't know about it, right? That's a certain kind of suspense. But if the reader knows about it and the character knows about it, right, that raises those stakes enormously. And if you can, if you care, if the reader cares about that character, suddenly the whole thing becomes kind of supercharged.
Mhm. So true. And for our listeners, that is exactly why we love this book, because we loved each and every one of these characters. You showed us a little bit of Lewis's childhood that I won't get into, some things that he endured. And then we have Teddy, who I personally loved. So I don't think it's giving a spoiler to tell our listeners that Teddy was the most lethal of all of them, the toughest, but he underwent an injury. And as a result, he's become a little softer. And I just have to bring up this quote because I loved it. Teddy said at one point, he said, "Don't worry. I'm not killing these guys. I'm a Buddhist, remember? I'm just going to take their knees out." I mean, you just got to love them. They're out there risking their lives to help people. And then you throw in these little really personable tidbits like this that makes the reader endeared to them, very much so. So on to my question. They're Batman. They're Robin Hood, aren't they, in a way? And I love their code. It says this: you keep your promises, even when it costs you. You support your friends, no matter the danger. Who doesn't love that, even in the real world? And their rules of engagement. You can shoot somebody, and when you can't shoot somebody was very clear. We love that too. Why is it that we long for heroes like these to come in and right wrongs and make justice where there is no justice? As the writer, what do you think draws us to them? Is it because we can't find justice in the real world, even sometimes in the small things?
Oh, I think that's exactly right. The world is complicated and dangerous, and if you read the news, there are all of these stories about people doing not so great things, and some of them really getting away getting away with it. That's the word. Sorry, I'm having one of those days. But I have that fantasy myself. I'm not acting on it. I'm not going to go out and hurt somebody who I think is a bad person. But I think we all have those moments where we're frustrated about, maybe it's the state of the world, maybe it's just the guy who cut you off in traffic, where we wish we could do something like this without consequences. The difference between sort of your average sort of thriller hero and Peter Ash is that he does what needs to be done, but you get to see the emotional turmoil because of it. There's a cost to Peter and to Lewis, especially in this book. And I think, like Batman, I mean, we all love that hero. But for me, it was really important to show sort of the humanity there as well, is that there are people in this world whose job it is to go do the hard thing, right? Whether you're a cop or, you're, serving your country in the armed forces, right? Your job is to go put yourself in the line of fire and do what has to be done. But there are rules. You're not allowed to, if you're in the Army, there are rules of engagement. Every interaction, you can't just do what you want. So even in those positions, right? If you're a cop, the stakes are enormously high, when you pull your gun, when you pull the trigger. So for normal folks like me, it's nice to imagine a world where we could actually, even the score and do some good. And again, that's, I think, where these books are appealing to people.
And so you make this, we know that this is fiction, but you also make these characters so real to us. So I think the reader maybe even walks away thinking, hey, I may not be able to go to that extent, but maybe I can do some good. Just look at their code. You support your friends no matter the danger. That's something we could all do. You tell the truth when you don't hurt people. Part of their code a little bit spoke to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, and I sort of came up with that in a way with this is sort of Lewis's code and the Ghost Killer's code as sort of like if I were going to be this person, how could I do this and live with myself? Crime writers in general, we think that we could rob a bank better than anybody, and so we all have these ideas about how you might do something. And so for me, it's this. I'm not a veteran. I'm not a tough guy in real life. Certainly not like Peter is. But these books are very personal for me. I am really interested in exploring, sort of the issues at the heart of every book. And this book has a deep set of kind of moral questions at the center of it. And what are you willing to do for your friends? What are you willing to do to save your family? I just think that's fascinating stuff.
Thank you. Because we all do think about that now and then. We do. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to dive into that just a little bit more because this was nonstop emotionally driven action. There's no doubt. Your characters were willing to risk everything when it was just them back in the day. But the calculus changed when they fell in love, when they bonded with stepchildren or with pets. And do you think that the risks we take in life are influenced by, who we might lose or endanger? And do you think vigilantism is a loner's calling?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I've ever been asked that particular question before, and I've done a bazillion interviews, and I feel like I've been asked all the questions. So I'm impressed. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the challenges as a writer to keep enlarging the world that Peter lives in, right? To keep enriching his life. The series itself starts where Peter is basically homeless. His post-traumatic stress is so severe he really can't be inside for more than a few minutes at a time. And my goal with the series is to show sort of how Peter addresses this issue and the ways in which he has gotten better. Until now, he's living with June Cassidy, his sweet patootie. He has work that is meaningful to him, aside from, going out to help folks. So he's become a more sort of a more complete person. And Lewis has done very much the same. Lewis was part of this criminal crew, but now he's married and he's got these kids that he just adores, these two boys, but they are still, inside of them that same person. I know a bunch of vets. There's a guy who's a friend of mine. He's a Vietnam vet, and he was a recon Marine, like Peter was. And he you can just see when that switch flips. He's got 3 kids, he's got grandkids. He is a charming and lovable guy. He was in sales after Vietnam. But you can see that switch flips, so that people that never leaves you, that capacity. And I think, to voluntarily go out and you know be a vigilante, as you say, is something that I think people are more likely to do if they don't have other things in their life. But once you do, you will do what you need to do, to protect what you have, and to keep it whole. And I think, I don't know, I never want Peter to begin as the aggressor, right? Peter is not like Jack Reacher in this way. Like Reacher cultivates the opportunity to commit violence, right? Peter is not that. Peter sees a problem. He sees someone that needs help, and that's really the start of things. And so I try not to have Peter be the initiator. I want the situation to arise, and Peter has a choice. He always has a choice. Do you step up and to be useful and to use those skills that you've acquired, or do you back away and let somebody else deal with it? And if you've been reading these books, you know the kind of person Peter is.
I loved something that you said because it made me think about the courage it takes to risk your heart, to become vulnerable in that respect. And to me, it's a different kind of courage because all of your characters are extremely courageous. There's no doubt about that. But it's almost as if they were exploring that next level by making themselves vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a really important. I thank you so much for bringing that up, because that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this book, was to kind of illuminate that. Like, it's one thing to be a tough guy and to wear your toughness like armor, right? I mean, if you're serving overseas, you're wearing actual armor. But when you come home, I think it's easy for people who have lived that life to not let other people in. There's an ethic of toughness in the military that people often have trouble taking off. And part of making it through getting better with post-traumatic stress is you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to sort of share the stories and to talk about the things that are haunting you. And you have to be able to be open with the people that you love. And that's true whether you're a veteran or you've got post-traumatic stress. You are never going to have a really deep and fulfilling human relationship, whether it's with your spouse or your kids, until they can see who you really are inside your heart, as you said. So that's just kind of part of how I want to live in the world. But it does feel risky to hanging out there. My wife and I, we have these long conversations, and every couple of weeks there's like I'm going to say this thing, and I know you love me, and we've been married almost 25 years, but it's still like, to say this thing that comes from somewhere inside, right? That's a hard thing for all of us.
Yes.
Absolutely. What a thoughtful response.
I love that. And did you think that as they allowed themselves to enter these very important relationships, the characters discovered something of themselves? Then they were allowed to see themselves not just as a military, a fighter, a Batman, but I kind of felt like they loved and embraced their new fatherhood, having someone who loved them, this girlfriend or wife in their life. Maybe it opened another world that maybe they didn't know that they could have at some point.
Sure. I mean, again, that's, you guys are asking such thoughtful questions about this book. The people who are when you're in combat, right? No matter who you are, no matter what that experience is, it's a traumatic experience. To go through that. If you talk to anybody who's been in combat, they won't necessarily describe it like that, but it never leaves you, right? It is a harrowing experience. But the best way to move through and past an experience like this is to allow yourself to evolve, is allow yourself to kind of to have your life continue to move forward. And I mean, there are lots of guys in the military who are married, and they come home, but then that relationship with their spouse has to change. Or if you're single when you come out, again, to move your life forward. Otherwise, you're a guy who spent 8 years in the Marines, and if that remains the most important part of you, you're like the guy who was the quarterback on the high school football team who never found the next thing, right? We always have to find the next thing, the way to grow as a human being. And for me, human relationships are a huge piece of that. You don't, I think you don't really become the kind of writer that I am unless you are super interested in human beings, unless you're super interested in how people work and what they care about. And again, this is a book that has a lot of action in it, that has a lot of this is probably more violent than most of my other books, but the heart of it, right, is who do you want to be, right? What's important to you as a person? Because those are the questions that I'm grappling with every day. I think we all are, whether we want to or not.
In that search for happiness, like, where am I going to get my happiness? And now I want to go back a little bit. I want to talk about who they used to be. And June said something about her own life that really struck me. She admitted that someone had tried to kill her several times. And she said this, I don't know why I keep coming back for more. It makes me feel alive. Maybe it's how I'm wired. Maybe the pain and fear are just the price you pay for doing the right thing. Because the right thing is never the easy choice. It's always the hard choice. And I just wanted to say, yes, June. Yep, it sure is, even in the real world. I just wondered what you thought of as the writer. Is everyone capable of doing the right thing? Or is June saying, are some people just wired differently and they always look to right the wrong, and they're willing to put their life in danger to save our country? Or are people just wired differently, or do we all have the capability?
Well, I think we all have the capability. I think the question is whether you think of yourself as being part of the community that you live in, right? Or the country that you live in, the state, the town, whatever. Or if you think that you are sort of a solo actor, even if you're part of your family, if you think that your needs and desires are the most important thing in the world, you are not going to put other people ahead of yourself. Whereas I think, people join the police force, and people join the Army and the Marines for multiple reasons, but the ones that I know best, the men and women that I have met and I still talk to on a regular basis, that they want to stand up for something, they want to be a part of something, and they buy into that mission. And it's hard, right? And it's hard to stay committed, because every step forward you take, you see the many ways you can fail, the many ways that the people you serve with can fail. So it's hard, and there is a cost to that. But I know I am somebody personally, I have always had a very strong sense of right and wrong. And my dad is the exact same way, and my son is actually the same way. So I think there is some, I don't know if that's passed down through that's a nature or nurture thing. But I think we all can. And I think part of I really don't want to talk politics, but part of our current crisis as a country is that, we used to be willing to work together to solve a problem. We used to be willing to give something up in order for other people's lives to get better. And I think we're losing some of that. And again, I'm writing about the things I care about. I'm writing about the things I'm passionate about, and I'm lucky that I get to do it in the context of a book that, again, is fast and fun, and hopefully will keep you up reading with a flashlight under the covers until very late at night. I mean, to me, that's the ideal reading experience.
And you're doing
Great.
it. And so even whether we have the opportunity to do as much good as the characters in your story or not. They're inspirational. They inspire all of us. Do a little better. Is there something we can do to make a difference?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I was on another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the host said that he'd interviewed a woman, another writer, who said that stories are the owner's manual to life. And I wrote it down and I stick it up on my board because I really think, I mean, we have been taking lessons from stories for centuries, for millennia. You go back to the first stories, which is, why does the sun rise in the sky? Why does winter come? Why does spring come? We have these elaborate, tales and myths across all cultures. Religion is, you may be a believer, you may not be a believer, but these are stories that instruct us on how to behave in the world, how to behave with each other. I mean, to me, stories are, it's the instruction manual. And my goal is to provide some of that, kind of that inspiration, that sense of hope, because I think it's really easy to be negative in this world. I think that's the easy way out. I think the harder thing for me is to find hope and to show people coming together. I mean, those are the stories I want to read. Those are the kind of stories I want to write.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Nick, I want to go back to another theme that's very strong in the story. We were talking about that moral code, and you really did explore a lot of moral gray areas, so to speak, in this story, which was, I think, one of the coolest parts of it. And Peter, Louis, Teddy, Ray, Nino, the ghost killers, they justified some of the choices they made, even in the past, by having this so-called moral code, which we all do, right? This is something we all adopt, and we try to live our lives consistent with it. But I wanted to ask you, this helped them justify some of their actions, but what about in this day and age where there's not a lot of universal agreement about what's right or wrong? Can we go off course with thinking with maybe a mindset of being a vigilante, especially one that has a moral code that they devised? Where can you get into trouble with that?
Well, that's super interesting. Boy, I want to be on this podcast every year.
Yeah.
Um,
Come on back.
You're on.
um, yeah, no, so I am really interested in the gray areas, right? So I am less interested in stories where the hero is handsome and chiseled, and he always does the right thing and makes the right decision, and the heroine is beautiful with cascading hair and all of that, and the villain is evil, and he's a terrible person, and he beats his wife and blah blah blah. I think we all, there's another sort of truism in the fiction gig, which is that we are all heroes in our own minds, right? We all think that we are the hero of our own story, and so again, making villains feel like real people too. Like, I think that's for me an interesting part of what I do, and an important part of what I do. But Peter does not always do the right thing. Some people sort of talk about Peter as this great hero, and I try to paint that for sure. I mean, Peter behaves better than I do, right? I sort of aspire to behave as well as Peter does in the world, but he does some stuff that he probably shouldn't do. And Lewis is not someone who dwells on regret for his past, but he's trying as hard as he can to put it behind him. I think we've all done things that we're not proud of, but that, to me, the gray area is where the really interesting things happen, where you can have that moral conversation, as you say. But in terms of these books, if someone's pointing a gun at you, you have a choice to make. And the question is, did you do something to cause them to point a gun at you? In which case, is your pulling the trigger justified, or is that your fault, right? And so I mean, those are super interesting questions.
After your story, Chris and I were having a discussion about that, and we were talking about how today there's a little bit more uncertainty in a lot of people about what is right or wrong or appropriate or not appropriate. And it makes all of these moral dilemmas that much trickier. And so, your book prompted a lot of excellent discussion. That's, again, one of the reasons why we loved it. And we appreciate you and these things that you're exploring.
Well, I thank you so much. I know to me at bottom, it doesn't feel very complicated. It's not that hard to see the right thing. It may be harder to do the right thing. And yeah, I mean, I do think people have different standards for that. You know, if you walk into a church with a bomb, do you think you're doing the right thing? I mean, it's complicated stuff. But I think in reality, I think we can all pretty much agree, except for a very, very, very small minority, that like that is not the right thing to do. No matter what your beliefs are, you don't get to kill other people indiscriminately, right? You can, and again, I'm not endorsing people who have those beliefs at all, but um, you know, I think you can concoct the most tortured sort of moral problem that you like, but for most of us in our day-to-day lives, it's not that complicated. You just have to choose. You just have to decide it's okay to give something up for the good of somebody else. And once you that's the crazy thing, right? So once you begin that, because there's a payoff, there's an internal emotional payoff for doing the right thing, even if it costs you, right? You think of yourself differently. You hold yourself differently. And so, you know, the people that I know that's a regular part of their makeup, you know, there's a reward for that, even if it costs you, you know, time or money or whatever, right? So you know, I think at bottom, you know, we don't all choose to be sort of the selfless um, uh, head of a homeless shelter, right? But we can all choose to, you know, help other people when that moment arises.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think the flip side too of something you just mentioned is that moral or that internal inconsistency and listening to it. Or I think maybe a lot of people in this, day and age, not just ignore it, but maybe cover it over, distract themselves. And so when that moral inconsistency is rising up, they're not picking up on it. Maybe had they, 40 years ago without social media, they might have
Right,
noticed it a little
right.
differently.
Well, we all have these voices in our head, right? We all have the voices saying, "Oh, I should have more pizza," or "Oh, let's, you know, I'll have a little more bourbon," or those are maybe just the voices in my head. But you know, there are those voices, and they're not always loud. But if you pay attention and you try to be sort of present in the world, you know, you'll hear those whispers, you know, to do the right thing. You know, I think that you know, it is easy to drown it out with between, you know, 400 streaming options and the smartphone in your pocket and social media and, you know, all of the distractions in the world. Um, you know, for me, I think the more silence you can have in your life, the louder those voices can be, and the easier it is to hear the voices and to know that they're telling you the truth as opposed to the voices telling you to eat more pizza.
So true. And that's why we love this book so much. The Price You Pay by Nick Petrie, because we say it all the time on the show. We love fiction because we don't think there is such a thing as pure fiction. It's all built on the reality of what we already know and feel to be true. So there's so many lessons to learn. We can find a little bit of ourselves in here, or maybe something that we wish we would be. And so thank you for that to Nick Petrie. Now, before we let you go, can you give us a little glimpse of what you're working on next?
Well, I'm actually not working on the next Peter Ash, although I have about 6 ideas that are sort of percolating. I am almost finished with my first standalone book, which is again going to be filled with these sort of moral questions. There's an ex-con named Bobby Cruikshank who is trying to live the straight, honest life until his younger brother Paul gets killed, and Bobby has to dive into this rural part of Wisconsin where he lives, and because the police aren't doing a whole lot, and so that's the piece I'm working on now. And in a way, it's you know, Peter, most of those stories take place in a different setting. And so I wanted to, and so Peter is always a stranger for the most part in these books. And so I wanted to tell a story about somebody who is deeply entrenched in a place. and who's surrounded by family. Peter's family really does not, they don't have a huge role in these books. So I wanted to kind of dive into those relationships and the complexity and how we feel about our various families. So that's the new project, and I was working on it this morning, and I'll go back to it this afternoon. It's super exciting and frankly terrifying to do something that's a bit different after writing 8 Peter Ash books.
Yeah. It sounds wonderful, and we're certain it's going to be phenomenal. We can't wait for it to come out. You're going to have to come back on and talk about that.
Sign me
And
up.
let me tell our listeners, in the meantime, pick up this book. You're going to love it. You can connect with Nick Petrie at his website, nickpetrie.com, where you can actually sign up for updates, and you can find him on Facebook and X. It's been a lot of fun talking to you today. Very interesting, great conversation. Really loved this book.
Well, thank you both so much for, well, you guys have really asked some super interesting questions, and you have really dived deep into the heart of this book in a way that I think most interviewers have not to date. So I really appreciate the conversation, and it's been a bunch of fun. As I said, I've signed me up. Happy to talk about this anytime with you too.
Well, we have to say thank you for saying that, because a lot of people tell us that. We think that's why we've been so successful. We read every book and vet every book before they come on. We take a lot of time and attention. And so you're here because we loved it. It was meaningful, and we love that deep dive. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. Have a great day. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Take care, Nick.
Thank you.
Well, that was a deep dive into so many of the themes that you and I love to talk about, Chris. I mean, truly, we have the privilege of hearing what's going on in the mind of these fantastic authors, and Nick is no exception. He is thinking about the issues that we are wrestling with on a daily basis. In fact, some of the things he brought up in this interview, you and I have actually talked about specifically, wanting to take justice into our own hands or take additional steps that, maybe put us in that gray area. We don't, but and so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people feel frustrated with maybe the legal system or the justice system, where it seems like there's not a lot of opportunity sometimes to address every wrong.
Mhm.
What do you think?
I agree. We can't solve all the world's problems. I guess when it hits home, and where we begin to think this vigilantism is the answer, is when some harm comes to someone that we love. Maybe not even ourselves, but when it's someone that we love in our family who is at risk or at danger, which is exactly what happened in The Price You Pay, it rises something up within us. Maybe there's even a stronger defense mechanism that kicks in during protection of someone other than us. I don't know, but that's when I see it the most. That's when I get the most angriest. If it's one of my family members or my children, that's where I could see it happening. How about
Yeah.
you?
Oh yeah. I'm going to even add pets to that list. Seriously. So you think about the vulnerability that comes with loving others and letting them into your circle. And that's one of the vulnerabilities, is that you can be hurt because those people can be hurt.
Mhm.
And that's tricky. And I want to ask you too about something else that I was thinking about when he was talking. When we have these relationships, when we let people into our lives, should that change some of the choices that we make in our own lives? For example, should we choose not to climb Mount Everest or skydive when we have children depending on us? What do you think?
This is a tough one, Kristen. This is another good question. I don't know what to say about that, because what if you're a police officer and your life's in danger? You can't stop. Or what if you're a fireman? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there. I think it depends on that individual. So you've been a skydiver all your life. Your child has grown up with you skydiving. Should you stop doing what you love because maybe they may lose you? I don't think so. I'm going to say no. Now, if it's something that causes danger to your family that you're doing, maybe the answer is yes. This is a
Yeah.
wide net you're casting over what you should or should not do. Where are you going with that? You got
Yeah.
some idea behind this?
Yeah, because I was thinking about the characters in the story. Everything changed when they had people into their lives. They took, I don't want to say fewer risks. They were taking risks, but they were doing things a little differently. They were using some wisdom about going into situations or going into a building.
Mhm.
And I love that growth that we all experience as we enlarge our lives
Mhm.
with people, with pets, with children, whatever it is.
Yeah,
So,
Nick spoke about that a little bit, and it's so true. In fiction, we like to see character growth of some kind. Some people say characters never grow. They just expose themselves. You see them in different ways. But in the real world, my hope is that yes, we all change and grow in some way. It would be a terrible thing to wake up every New Year's Day and say, I am going to be the exact person I was. I'm going to do nothing different. I have no resolution, no hopes, no dreams. That's the stuff of life right there. And how about this? The therapist in the book said this. Now, listen, it's simple. We've heard it before, but it made me take a long, hard look at it and say, is this true? Everybody gets to choose their own story, choose who they want to be. Is that true? What do you think?
I don't that's a really great question. In fact, you and I have talked about this in the past. I think we can choose how we respond to things, our attitude about them, our efforts that we put forth to achieve something, but there's a lot that's out of our hands. And, there's a lot of factors that come into play that we have no control over. Opportunity, money, you know, being at the right place at the right time, knowing the right person at the right time. And so that's a tricky one. We can choose some things, we can influence some things, but there's a whole lot that is unpredictable. What do
So
you think?
much. I agree. I totally agree with that. And then I wanted to bring this up too. I don't want to go into it too much because it's a spoiler, but in this book, Nick Petrie revealed Lewis had a severe childhood trauma. I don't think it's a spoiler by me saying that he was left without parents. And he went through a lot of things. Now, Lewis turned out to be a great guy because of it. And I actually loved that in this story. But in the real world, I don't know if that's always the case. I would love to believe that every child who goes through trauma is able to then take that wound or hurt and utilize it to help the world in some way. But I don't know if it's always true. What do you think?
Yeah. One thing I think we've gained from all of these books that we read is that trauma is something that is not well understood. We know that there are far ranging impacts. We know it could even potentially change your very DNA. And I think the most important thing is that we need to understand the human mind better so that we can address trauma and maybe even prevent trauma down the road.
Mhm. And maybe that's why we love fiction because of this great group of people in this book who did take justice in their own hands, and people like Lewis as a child who was able to crawl out of that horrific hardship and use it to turn the world around. Like that's just giving us hope. This, The Price You Pay by Nick Petrie. There's a lot of hope in here. There's a lot of inspiration in here. So readers, you got to
Absolutely.
pick it up. Don't miss it. You're going to absolutely love it. Whether you're familiar with the Peter Ash novels or not, you don't want to miss this book. And in the meantime, we've got so many books on here that I'm just going to say the author's name and you're going to know that. And because otherwise we'll be here forever. But we've got Mary Kubica, Michelle Gable, Dervla McTiernan, Susan Mallory, Lisa Unger, Heather Gudenkoff, Liza Palmer, Christopher Reich, Ashley Elston, Bonnie Jo Campbell, CJ Box, Wabashig Rice, and Amiko Jean. Wow. Kristen, we're not going to get any sleep.
It's par for the course. And listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for spreading our socials. We are very grateful. We have these fantastic authors, and we're diving in deep, as you heard, with this discussion and with all the others about the real life issues that matter to every one of us. So please find us on bookstormpodcast.com, and you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on X. You can find us on YouTube. We have 125 plus different authors, and we have these kinds of excellent discussions with every one of them. So please join us and please spread the word. Till next next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.